All right, everyone. Dissidents, welcome one and all. This is the Do Dissidents podcast. My name is Keaton Weiss here with Russell Dobular.
Hello.
And today we have the great pleasure of welcoming Shahid Buttar. You all know who he is. He is a perennial thorn in the side of Nancy Pelosi, as well as a poet, a musician, an activist, an organizer. Shahid, it was great to meet you. Thank you so much for making the time for us today.
Thanks for having me on. Great to be with you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I reached out to you a few weeks ago because I thought your eulogy for the Queen was the best that I had read. I thought you did a beautiful job with that, but we couldn't piece that show together. And so you reached out and you said, hey, I have this article that I wrote on my Substack called Democrats versus Democracy. I like the piece quite a bit. And, you know, seeing as the doomsday clock is getting closer to midnight, this other sort of side issue about the possibility of nuclear war has us a little distracted. We haven't been doing as much midterm coverage as we wanted to, but now that we got you here, I want to jump into this. So you sent me a tweet along with the article. First, I'll put up the original Nancy Pelosi tweet. 100% of House Republicans said no to COVID relief, $1,400 checks, blah, blah, blah. She runs down the laundry list and tells voters, say no to them, vote for Democrats. And you replied, under your leadership, Democrats have repeatedly leveraged racism and white supremacy as an election strategy. If your supporters understood the truth or local reporters ever showed up for work, you would have been sent into retirement decades ago. And I feel like many of the things that you touch on in your recent article have a lot to do with what you hint at in that tweet. So do you want to just lay out your case?
Sure. I appreciate that. And thanks so much for the invitation and having me on today. The article basically gets into some largely unexplored or unacknowledged publicly ways in which the Democratic Party systematically assaults democracy, particularly by vilifying the very communities that it relies on for electoral support. So Democrats somewhat famously rely on Black Americans, on Muslim Americans, on Latinos for support at the polls. But at every turn, from policies addressing redlining in the housing context to policies addressing economic equity and opportunity, policies addressing racism and biases in the criminal justice system, our broken and in crisis fascist, frankly, immigration system, whatever the foreign policy, whatever arena you look at, the communities on which the Democratic Party relies for support are undermined by the party's positions. And the only way that the party is able to get away with that is by demonizing the voices that actually do challenge the entrenched pillars of power, as I did with Nancy Pelosi, and leveraging the very racism and white supremacy that the party claims to stand against. And this is a somewhat well-worn point in other circles. People decry openly, and should, the open, unapologetic race of the GOP, and we might say by proxy, some parts of the South. But many voices in the Black community have lamented for decades, generations, in fact, how racism persists in the North, including in very liberal enclaves. I ran for Congress in the most supposedly progressive city in the country. And what I encountered could not happen in any city in the South, which is to say the smug self-assurance of liberal and progressive enclaves about their own transcendence over long-worn, disappointing patterns in our democracy not only persist, but these are the very gateways through which the corporate corruption of our democracy takes hold. If Pelosi were not able to rely on racist character assassination to insulate herself from electoral accountability, a great many things would have, not just a seat in Congress, but all of the policies that these figures insulate and entrench. And I'm not the only one who encountered this. Nina Turner faced her version of it when she was derided as an angry Black woman by the very same PR firm retained by AIPAC and Democratic Majority for Israel. These were the PACs covered by Ryan Grimm and his two most recent analyses. Maybe I should have started there. My article was a response to two articles written by the DC bureau chief at The Intercept, Ryan Grimm, for whom I have great respect. And his most recent piece, Primary Occupation, was the title, picked up where his previous piece called Elephants in the Zoom, or Elephant in the Zoom, had left off. And these two pieces address different parts of the Democratic Party dysfunction, Elephant in the Zoom addressed the pattern of progressive organizations being kneecapped by internal strife, initiated by activists internally seeking goals that they haven't been able to achieve in broader society. And Ryan's analysis sort of takes this further point, making the observation that these organizations, from campaigns like mine, he mentions our campaign in the article, to organizations like the Sierra Club. I think the one that he goes into deepest in the article, it escapes me which one he particularly focuses on, but this happened at Brand New Congress, at Movement for a People's Party. This happened at any number of campaigns. It happened to Alex Morris. It happened to Nina Turner. They tried to do this to, particularly to Cori Bush, though she was able to get around it. But this pattern of identity-based accusation, and I should pause here and note, a lot of people are confused about white supremacy and what it means. And they think that racism means when you accuse somebody of something because you have a prejudice. But that's not what racism means. Racism and white supremacy in this context refer to when power entrenches itself by relying on biases, and when people of color who challenge power are artificially accused of fabricated accusations, whether they're motivated in people trying to build careers, or whether they're motivated in trying to protect an oligarch, or whether they're motivated in hate, or whether they're motivated in some kind of racial-based avarice. It's all equally racist. And in fact, I would say in some respects, to accuse someone out of a prejudice is much less racist than to accuse someone in order to entrench power, because racism is inherently political. It's much bigger than merely prejudice. And I encountered the racism, the strategic, organized, orchestrated, still unapologetic racism of the Democratic Party. And the only reason I think that's particularly significant, of course, is that the Democrats claim to be better than the fascist GOP. And having, stared the Gorgon in the face, I've, discovered that's not in fact true. And San Francisco, similarly, I think has a very smug, like many liberal enclaves, attitude of being something, whether it's better than, or holier than thou than, or more progressive than many of our other municipal counterparts across the country. But again, the patterns that infect the city, not just impacting me, but I could rattle off other candidates: Eric Curry, John Jacobo, Julian Davis. There is a pattern of people of color in the city, Gloria Berry, being targeted, threatened, neutralized, falsely accused, and white journalists lining up behind strategic accusation, defending an establishment from challenges from the left. And maybe the last quote I'd just offer here, this didn't come into the article so much, but it seems worth noting here. San Francisco has a black mayor. We sent a black vice president to Washington, D.C. And so to make the case of the racism of a city might seem odd, given that background. There's no city in the country that has lost 3/4 of its black population to gentrification in a generation. Just objectively, that is the most racist outcome of a housing market of any city in the country. And this pattern of artificial accusation punching not just at candidates of color, but candidates of color who stand on the left. That's what takes it from prejudice to racism. Is there is an ideological component to this, which is to say, we are not the targets of these accusations, the targets of the accusations that took out Julian Davis, that blocked John Jacobo from his political career, that knocked me out of my race for Congress, that smeared Gloria Berry. These same forces in our city, Democrats, proud Democrats, many of them calling themselves progressives, even socialists, as well as many moderates, across the political spectrum, Democrats have aligned themselves with racist character assassination as an election strategy. And I do think that if the supporters of the party understood that, it would be an interesting conversation to have, because what this story ultimately implicates is not just the strategic racism of the party, but the legitimacy of the party leader, who is herself a corporate oligarch, who repeatedly supported Republican policies, from the pay-go rules to military spending, and dragging her feet on the impeachment process, where she left cards on the table, blocking Medicare for all, and defending a corporate health insurance racket. These are all Nancy Pelosi's legacy. And these are the issues that are implicated by the challenges to the leadership that figures like I and Nina Turner and Alex Morris and Cori Bush have all mounted. And, I'm glad that Cori got in. It's interesting to see the leadership continue to come after the voices that were able to flip seats to progressive hands. And I am, on the one hand, grateful to be out of politics. I am frankly, it's a great thing for me to be out of politics, and my psyche is at greater peace now than it certainly was when I was running. I do think it was a loss for the whole, but ultimately that's not my problem. That's a choice other people made, and we'll all have to bear the consequences.
I mean, I think it's a great point when you say that these kinds of things can only happen in places where you have these sort of smug self assurance that you're not part of the problem, right? People in San Francisco, they just take it upon themselves to exempt themselves, right? Well, we're not racist. Therefore, whatever we say and do, you might look racist. It might be racist in practice, but no, trust us. We know that we're not racist. So, as a candidate of color who directly challenged Nancy Pelosi, obviously, in a very woke, wealthy, liberal city. What were some of the biggest obstacles that you faced in terms of getting your message out, aside from the fact that you were doing it grassroots against someone with a virtually limitless war chest? Aside from that, in terms of just communication, direct communication with voters, what were some of the biggest obstacles that you faced?
So the one was the party patronage network. And before I dive into what that meant, when you noted the sort of caveat aside from the resource deficit, we were outspent. I'm referencing 2020 here, not 2022. I ran in a couple different cycles, and my high watermark was in 2020 when we won the primary, and then 81,000 votes in November. It was the only time Pelosi's ever faced another Democrat in a general election, and in that race, we scored more votes than anybody ever had, challenging her by far. And the challenges in getting there certainly included money. We were outspent 15-1, but we raised $1.6 million, and most of that before I was smeared, which is to say we were able to neutralize the resource deficit. That's why character assassination was the counterattack. Usually the establishment doesn't mount responses like that unless you overcome the first hurdle, which you noted is the resource deficit. So we mobilized support, over $1 million from 20,000 people around the country. I found the timidity of people who claimed to share my policy prescriptions and values, but who were dedicated to their own careers first. That ultimately was the biggest hurdle. I'll give you two examples of that. One, a figure I will leave unnamed, but a member of a state legislature who has served for 17 years said to me, 17 years at the time, so longer than that by now. And he said to me, I love you. I love what you stand for. I want you in Congress, and I dare not support you in public, or she will end my career, was the message I heard from this career legislator, like established figure with a base, awards, the whole nine, what have you, right? Thought leader. And, that was a soft version of what I'll tell you next. The Harvey Milk Democratic Club. I'll get spicy with this. This is a nominally grassroots Democratic Party organization here in San Francisco. It's named after the first openly gay elected official in the country, someone by whom I've been very inspired, someone who was assassinated in City Hall for standing up for what he believed in and representing his community. The organization named after him has been taken over and co-opted by a bunch of establishing politicians, careerists, people, and I'll name names like Jackie Thornhill, who works in the office of Supervisor Raphael Mandelman, who was documented as someone making racist threats, targeting a Navy veteran to try to silence her voice when she spoke out to expose the plot to smear me in defense of Nancy Pelosi. That example, and that was just an example, and Jackie, I should note, was on the board of the Harvey Milk Club. And the Harvey Milk Club appointed to its board two of the different people who orchestrated the smears targeting me, one of whom then went on to be the finance director of a state assembly campaign run by the chair of the San Francisco Democratic Party. And to see the party reward orchestrators of racist, and I should note, when the Black journalist who covered the story finally published the story a year after it all happened, they described what I encountered as a civic lynching. A civic lynching in which lots of people participated, including people who serve right now on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. Supervisor Dean Preston, wealthy, white supremacist, goes by a socialist on our Board of Supervisors, and I'm not the only person of color who he's falsely accused at the drop of a hat with no process at all. And when you have public officials accusing people of color of grave misdeeds based on no evidence, no investigation, no nothing other than racist claims, in order to serve themselves, that is white supremacy. And the socialists who hide behind their smug self-assurance that they are not the problem, unfortunately, the most intense racism I've ever encountered as an immigrant a Muslim immigrant from the UK of Pakistani origin, were from people who describe themselves as progressives and socialists in San Francisco, particularly gay institutions. And I want to bridge here from people's racism to institutional racism. This is where I want to go hard on the Harvey Milk Club and Dramatic Socialites of America. It's another group that deserves the same accountability. So then the Harvey Milk Club just had their annual fundraiser, the gala here.
When you say Dramatic Socialites of America, that's a dig, right, on the DSA? I mean, it's fine. Right. I don't care, but I just wanted to make that clear for everybody. I thought that was a clever turn of phrase.
And we are stealing that.
As well you should. It's
yes.
Yes. I'm telling you, white people who describe themselves as socialists is who I'm getting at here in the United States. And what I encountered in both of these groups was open opportunism, right? If it builds yourself a career, the leaders of both of these groups will jump behind any set of lies, and ultimately to the detriment of their own stated principles. That's the part that I particularly find appalling. And while, to see the Harvey Milk Club, for instance, reward the orchestrators of smear campaigns and give them board appointments, send into the offices of sitting elected officials aides with documented histories of making threats, targeting whistleblowers of color. There's another person I should note who's running for mayor right now in Oakland across the bay, Sheng Tao. And on her senior staff is another person, Brandon Harami, who is documented in the same article in the SF Bayview as a. And when I say racist, I don't just mean someone who wears a hood. I mean someone who orchestrates and organizes racism in public to mislead the public, undermine the public interest, advance their own careers at the cost of their stated principles. Dean Preston is the only elected official who backed that smear, but he's certainly one of the examples in the city who I think still deserves very much accountability. There was a state Senate candidate, Jackie Fielder, who was unfortunately part of this, Brandon Harami, who's on Sheng Tao's staff, Jackie Thornhill, who's on Raphael Mandelman's staff. I should note that this is just one example. When Nina was there as an angry Black woman, I want to dig in on this. There was a particular figure there. I believe her name was Hillary Rosen, who is one of the, I think she's a senior vice president at the public relations firm SKDK. Now, SKDK figured into my article because they're a repeat player here, and I want to unpack how they relate to Ryan's second story. And this is another one of those headwinds I encountered, right? So if the co-optation of the patronage network of people who claim to share values was one challenge, and that was a sort of individual challenge, this is the institutional reflection of that, how the patronage network asserted its force to undermine democracy and entrench the party leader, even after we'd neutralized the resource deficit. And so SKDK is a PR firm. They represent the president of the United States. They represent the vice president of the United States. They represent AIPAC, the American Israel Political Action Committee. They represent DMFI, Democratic Majority for Israel. AIPAC and DMFI were the subjects of Ryan's second story, explaining how these PACs have been raising money, dark money, which is to say undisclosed money from undisclosed secret sources, influencing and ultimately swinging closely contested congressional races all over the country. And he gets into this in the second of his story, his primary occupation, how this has been kneecapping a progressive agenda writ large. One of the reasons we don't have universal health care in this country is because a set of PACs dedicated to enabling human rights abuses by US proxy powers in other countries is basically blocking Americans from having legitimate elections. And it begs a question, how do you vote if you're an American and you want to vote against militarism? I might ask you that as a not rhetorical question. Do either of you have thoughts there?
Not this year.
Well, and that brings up something I think a lot of our listeners are concerned about. It's kind of a running theme in our show. Okay. You mentioned an anonymous person who told you, I'd love to endorse you, but you'll destroy my career. Now, that could explain why a lot of the progressives, that veterans of the Bernie Sanders movement put their energy behind, have turned out to be such complete disappointments. And we're at a juncture here where a lot of progressives just feel like it's not even worth it. We look at AOC literally. We just interviewed them yesterday, the AOC protesters at our town hall, and she just straight out lied about what happened there. There's no other way to construe it. She lied about the entire incident, claiming they had been shouting over a deaf person. That's a complete fabrication of what happened in that room. this is one of ours. This is one of ours. And when you look at these people that we fought to get into these offices, they all voted for the Ukraine aid packages. None of them are really, none of them stood up against Pelosi. They refused to force a vote on Medicaid for all. So you have a lot of people who, because of that and because of what happened to you, actually, have said, you know what, the system is so rigged. It's so corrupt. Why would we even get involved in trying to elect someone like Shahid? For example, even you, we would have to ask at this point, well, look what happened to all these other people. Once you get them in office, it seems like they bring them in a back room and name the addresses of all their close relatives if they vote the wrong way. I mean, I'm joking, but really, it seems like they sat them down, had to talk with them as soon as they got elected, and that was it. They become different people.
You can almost date when it happens, right? When the class of, I guess it was 2018, when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar went to Congress, and to go from the sit-in at Pelosi's office over the Green New Deal, to the Mama Bear moment when it's like the spread on, I think it was Vanity Fair maybe, and like
no, she was on The View,
and like I get it, people have to make their choices, but as somebody who ran on the same platform to back up her legislative agenda against the person who was its principal impediment, to have never gotten a shout out once in the 6 years that I ran, and to get and it's not like just her. I mean, no one in the squad ever dared touch me with a 10-foot pole, even Bernie. It's a great story here, actually. If we have a couple minutes, I'd love to share this. One of my highlights and lowlights of the 2020 campaign was the one time Bernie Sanders was asked about me. And it was by a San Jose, California television anchor who asked Bernie, well, I should set the context. This is roughly March, maybe late February. It was around the time Bloomberg had just gotten in the race. And there was a debate. Bloomberg had said to the national audience, we can't nominate Bernie because if we do, we're going to lose the House majority. And there was this moment the following day, I was stunned to see Nancy Pelosi, who welcomed Bloomberg into the presidential primary campaign, say in public, Mike's wrong. The House majority is secure. If Democrats want to support Bernie, there's no problem here. So Pelosi stayed off Bernie's back. I'm going to come back to that in about a minute at the end of the story, because that's ultimately the takeaway. So Pelosi extends Bernie a fig leaf in the middle of the presidential primary after I'd won the primary and become the first Democrat to challenge her, openly aligned with him and his legislative agenda.
No, hold on. If I'm sorry to cut you up, but when you say won the primary, can you clear up what you mean?
Thank you. And that's an important point to raise. In California, as well as Washington State, we have a jungle primary, a top two primary, which is to say, in most states, people think of a primary election as each party has their own, and the winners of which advance to a general election. In states where many regions are effectively one party controlled, like California,
right, it's top two no matter what, right? Yeah,
exactly right. So we run all the parties, candidates against each other. That's why we call it a jungle primary. The incumbent usually takes first place, and in top two states like California and Washington, the second place winner, even if they're in the same party, gets to challenge that person in the general election. Right. And I'm the only Democrat to have ever done that here in San Francisco in the 35 years that she's held the seat. And so I've won the primary at this point. I've got Bernie's mood kind of rallying behind us. He gets asked by this anchor. Bernie says, I'm not involved in that race. And then the anchor presses him and says, okay, that's interesting. A lot of your supporters are. And Bernie says, I know, and I'm not. Nancy's doing a fine job in the House. Says the visionary running for Congress who's introduced the Medicare for All bill and proposal, made it an object of national controversy and organizing, as it rightfully should be, a figure who's backing the Green New Deal. Both of these programs stymied, impeded infamously by the very same figure who he's saying is doing a fine job in the House, right? He's a avowed proponent for rationalizing the military budget, channeling some of those funds that we're wasting on death and destruction for profit back into the needs of an American people struggling to make ends meet. And who's on the other end of that fight? Nancy Pelosi. And so to see Bernie come out and, one way, my first reaction to it was like, seriously, man, you too, A2 Brutus. Like I felt like I was getting thrown under the bus by him. The second piece, my second reaction was like, damn, man, really, you too? And that was more about the sort of betrayal of the principles. And then, the sort of final reflection that came back to me was, at the end of the day, I was the threat that kept Nancy Pelosi off Bernie's back. And that's what a loyal lieutenant does. You take the hit. And I was grateful for him to, not have her at his throat. I was grateful for the support that he got. I was grateful for the momentum that he established. I was devastated when he dropped out of the race. It kind of crushed my hopes, right? Because the whole reason I ran, I signed up to be part of his like team. And then to watch him go down and realize the best I could hope for was to fight, against this encroaching fascism as the, member of minority faction besieged on both fronts, both by the fascist GOP and corporate aligned Democrats. Like, the context shifted very dramatically then. It went from being something I was excited about to like, oh, damn, it's going to be like this. Okay, I'm here for it. And the only reason I ran in 2022 is all the issues got worse, and the threat of authoritarianism openly has grown even more present, let's say. And as much as I don't want the job, I can't imagine a more intense circle of hell for a committed person than trying to fight fascism up close and personal. I know there's nobody who's better situated to do it, so I signed up to run again. And I'm grateful that I took third and did not win second place in the jungle primary this June. So, I'm sort of done with all that. But what was the point of all that? Oh, the point of all that was particularly this dynamic of even Bernie Sanders, figure by whom I've been inspired. I think a great many other people have been inspired. I watched him in close moments where it mattered, suddenly have very different things to say than what he says at the campaign rallies. And, this club in DC among the incumbents, whatever their stripes, this commitment to each other and their own self-protection is a huge part of the problem. My very first case as a baby lawyer 21 years ago was about money and politics and trying to close that spigot. And so I see my legal and political career kind of bookended by, trying to fight in the courts to get money out of politics, then fighting the elite in the electoral arena against someone who sort of embodies that problem. And unfortunately, I've seen the arc over my career, at least, democracy in America has taken a beating. And the point of the article in particular is that Democrats are wielding the hatchet in every way that the Republicans are too.
Yeah, and I would love to just get your opinion now that, you'll be on the sidelines going into this November. We got a vote coming up 2 weeks from tomorrow.
Yeah.
We're going live here on the 24th. So by the time a lot of people see this, it'll be less than 2 weeks out. Will these betrayals come back to bite them? Because, I think a major untold story of this campaign, and I'm going to go out on a limb and predict here that this is going to be a major story on election night. And once we get the exit polls in, I think something that a lot of people are missing is going to be decreased and depressed black turnout in this race. Because if you look at where the Democrats are faring best in terms of statewide races, it's in states like Colorado, New Hampshire, Arizona, states with not as big an African-American population as states like Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania, where you have major cities like Milwaukee, Philadelphia, Cuyahoga County, obviously. Those are the states where Democrats really seem to be struggling now. And those are the states, even Georgia, right? Stacey Abrams is running behind where she was running in 2018 when she ran. And so I think that a sort of depressed African-American turnout, we're going to see that on November 8th. And a lot of people are missing that because a lot of people are thinking, this is going to be all about the culture wars, all about inflation, but I think in order for Democrats to compete statewide in those places I mentioned, they need to run up African-American margins and numbers. And I don't think they're going to have either. And does that have anything to do with the kind of sleaziness that they've been engaged in when it comes to weaponization of racial stereotypes and racial politics in general over these past several years?
I would hope that it might. I think it ultimately relates, and I don't disagree with your analysis at all. I do think that African-American turnout is going to be a Achilles heel for the Democratic Party. And I would chalk it up to 4 words, 2 names: Herschel Walker, Kanye West. Tells you everything you need to know. There is a movement within the Black community that rightfully so recognizes the co-optation of Democrats, and not just on these sleazy, character assassination campaigns, openly in policy, right? I mean, when Nancy Pelosi instructed the House caucus, Democrats, to give Black Lives Matter activists nothing in policy, and to give them false assurances and resort to theater, and then does it herself, kneeling in kente cloth while signing a bill named after George Floyd, whose name she can't even remember at the press conference, introducing the bill that would expand police budgets and police surveillance across the country. When that happens, I think people will learn who is actually fighting for them and not, right? And just the absolute failure of Democrats to do anything for struggling, particularly working families of all racial stripes in this country. But beyond that, when you look at the communities that have been impacted by specific kinds of marginalizations, we've seen this with the Latino community already. There was an era when Latinos voted much more heavily Democratic than they have in recent cycles. Part of that is the culture wars. Part of that is GOP outreach. Part of that is Democratic Party failure. And I mean policy failure. Now, here's the rub, right? To the extent the Democratic Party is a business, and it's just a racket to promote the agencies and the consultants like SKDK that surround it, that might actually be success because they're not in it for policy anyway. It's a business to most of these people. Right? Those of us who care about principles, we're the ones who get character assassinated so that the careerists can keep their jobs. And at the end of the day, I think of that dynamic, the careerism. I'll give this to you a totally different way. I talked about when Bernie dropped out of the 2020 presidential primary and how devastated I was there. I want to give you a counter narrative for why he dropped out that I haven't seen widely described. It goes like this. He had staffers who wanted jobs in DC, staffers who wanted jobs in DC that they thought they could get under the next Democratic president if the guy they were running under did not come out fangs barred and with a flamethrower. And they probably said to him, Bernie, we can continue to effectuate your agenda. You might not be carrying the flag, but, it's been not me, us. So it's not going to be you. It's going to be us. And the irony is when we were all saying not me, us, it was not him, Bernie, us, the supporters is what we all thought. I think a bunch of his staff thought it was not him, Bernie, us, the staff.
Right.
So these self-interested folks, and you can't blame them because people want to build, I guess, whatever, right? But so they're whispering in his ear, drop out of this race because we can insinuate ourselves into the next administration through a non-electoral process. And I think the country suffered dramatically as a result because at a time when we needed his voice, public, pushing Biden hard from the left, he was not there because he put the interests of staffers in front. And this dynamic of careerists seeking opportunities at the cost of their own principles, I do think that is the shoal on which all of our aspirations crashed. And I, frankly, don't know how long that's been going on. That might be millennia by now. But I've certainly seen it in more ways than I can count. And it pains me, frankly. Every time I see a nonprofit advocate go into some presidential administration to supposedly try to fix the issues that they've been working on, and then they just end up becoming messengers for the very same things that they've been fighting for the preceding decade, that, is like clockwork. Even I'd say a whole other dimension of this, from like a women's rights, LGBTQ inclusion perspective, we've seen a remarkable diversification of the senior ranks of any number of agencies. There's a Black Secretary of Defense. There was a woman who led the CIA, and they kept doing the exact same sordid things that their predecessors.
Right.
So this tokenism as a response to, and it's not just tokenism, it's to either of these things are bad, to tokenize people of color and essentially try to, launder the interests that continue under their leadership. Clarence Thomas comes to mind as an example. Whether it's tokenism and then you've got these sort of racist character assassination campaigns to protect capital and power. Either one of those would be bad enough. You put the two together, the disingenuity and the weaponization of race in both directions, both to co-opt and to block and prevent real representation from emerging. I think those are some of the reasons why you might see depressed turnout from some of the communities of color that Democrats have relied on. I think the Black community is certainly one. Latinos is one where we've already seen this start to happen. I think immigrants generally, or communities from immigrant communities, there is a widening recognition, particularly because of the bipartisan nature of our immigration system's chaos and Kafkaesque commitment to human rights abuses at scale. I think there's been an increasing awareness that this country is not what we claim to be. And I think that awareness is starting to expand across more layers of people as they start getting educated about our country's history. Now, unfortunately, this isn't all history, right? Too much of this continues right now. We have concentration camps at our nation's borders under a Democratic president. We have an industrialized slave labor manufacturing base in the United States today in prisons under a Democratic president, right? We have a belligerent foreign policy that is stoking conflicts on both ends of the world at once. with nuclear powers under a democratic president so we can sell a bunch of weapons. I mean, it's just absolutely grotesque. And so, one reason why I think turnout might be lower is a lot of people might be wondering for themselves, what exactly is the point of voting for an alternative when it really doesn't make much of a difference anyway? And at the end of the day, the accountability for that should lay at the feet. This was one of the points of my article, not at AIPAC's feet, not at DMFI's feet, as Ryan Grimm places the blame. I'm eager to pin the tail on the donkey, which is to say on the party and its leaders who commit the party and its agents like SKDK, who Ryan does not name, who commit the party and its agents to these patterns, tokenism in the best case, character assassination in the worst case, both advancing a strategic co-optation of race in the service of protecting capital and power. And at the end of the day, for those of us who fought to defend the future from the predation of the past, I think there is this recognition of like, I did everything I could, I mean, I didn't sleep for 6 years, right? I went doing that. I gave it my reputation, it destroyed my career, and like, it's other people's problem now, and I do hope enough people are paying attention that they might force some accountability. I haven't seen any of it in San Francisco. There's a council member, the president of the LA City Council just stepped down a week and a half ago after her racist comments were unearthed. Her name was Nuri Martinez. The racist member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, Dean Preston, whose racist acts were reported in public at the time, remains in office. And no one in the press has ever asked him a question about this. And I find it amazing that a white, wealthy office holder in a supposedly progressive place can get away with this pattern and practice with impunity among people who the most progressive who line up behind them. And I'm just like, okay, y'all, if that's how it is, like, good luck with it. I'll be here at the end of it.
I mean, it sounds to me. Sorry, Russell, go ahead.
I think we're on the same page here, but I want to clarify. You define a lot of these tactics as white supremacy. But it doesn't seem to me that it's really they're willing to use tactics of racism, sexism, homophobia in the case of Alex Morse, whatever they need to preserve their power.
Yeah.
But they're perfectly happy to grab people with diverse identities, happier even because it's a great cover for them. And Angela Davis said it very well. She said, I don't really believe in diversity as a form of justice. It's a corporate marketing strategy. That's what diversity is for them. So they'll deploy these racist techniques. It just depends on who's running. And anyone who was fighting against Hillary Clinton got called a sexist. Okay, she wants a lower minimum wage. More women are affected by that than men, but this is great for them. They love that. They love to have everybody fighting about that. And I think that ties to Ryan's piece too, where he actually quoted one of the anonymous executives saying the left doesn't believe it can really hold power, so it turns inward on these internal battles. And I think the leadership that you're identifying, they're encouraging that. And I think it is also because so much of the left is in this psychological headspace. We can't really affect change. So we're going to go after our manager. We're going to go after the executive director of our organization. All of it is turned to interrogating internal dynamics that really don't affect the outside world. And that's exactly what they want. I don't know that I don't think it's motivated by racism. They love it when they can tokenize somebody. It's motivated by power.
Right.
If they could get a very diverse group of people who are going to vote for more arms sales and to support corporations, that's even better for them than having a bunch of white faces, because that makes it too obvious.
So to some extent, this is a crucial point to raise. And the question is, does white supremacy inhere in intention, or does it inhere in impact and result? And when I use the word white, I'm talking particularly about capital ultimately. So, tokens rotate in and out of focus, right? But at the end of the day, what we're talking about here is capital and its preservation by the strategic leveraging. And this is the particular piece, not of hatred, not of avarice. Maybe this is a thesis that would be worth debating in itself. White supremacy does not inhere in hatred. It does not inhere in avarice. It inheres in ignorance and in opportunism. And you're absolutely right that the people who smeared me were opportunistic And you're distinguishing between racists and white supremacists. And you're saying, well, Dean Preston might be an opportunistic racist, but he's not a white supremacist because he doesn't wear a hood and burn crosses on City Hall on the lawn. And my contention is that the distinction between the two is illusory, because it's not actually the open stated intention that is the problem. It is the strategic opportunism in the context of this race-based ignorance. There's a further piece I should add here, just sort of a gloss, which is that, you know, as a Muslim, what I faced really wasn't entirely along racial lines. A lot of it was religious too, right? I was being derided as a misogynist and a this and that, all kinds of things I don't even want to repeat. And there's a well-worn trope about Muslim men and these things. It's half of why we fought a war for 20 years based on fraudulent lies that just ended more or less at the same time I was going through this experience, right? And there's people marching in the streets. This is like the summer of George Floyd as the Democratic Party is turning its racist fangs on me, and in order to protect its leader. And that's the part I don't want to get lost in all this. It's not like they, it came after me because of anything. It wasn't me. It wasn't about me. It was about protecting the leader. And that's why accountability is so important. Like, I don't care about justice for me or Alex or Nina, like whatever. We volunteer to carry the flag, and whatever happens to us, it is what it is, I guess. I mean, I'm in federal court right now trying to hold the corporate press accountable for its role in all this. It's one thing for wealthy white racists in office to say things about people. Well, when the press starts printing lies, demonstrated lies, and suppressing whistleblowers and evidence in the service of protecting capital and abandoning ethics and accuracy, that, that's not just a problem for me, right? I was not the target of any of this. I was the subject of this, but the targets were 800,000 of my neighbors who vote for Congress in order to sway them and, again, insulate an oligarch who remains in the seat to this day, continuing to ply her corrupt wares, insider trading, still to this day. I've been raising that issue since 2018, and I'm grateful a bunch of people are paying attention now, but nothing's changed, right? The Democratic Party is still up to its neck in a bunch of millionaire policymakers filling their pockets openly, unapologetically, with no restriction at all.
Yeah, I mean, it sounded to me like when you were talking about,
But just want to close that is white supremacy.
Sorry, go ahead.
That's all I wanted to say. Like, when you have power that is unaccountable and capital that is protected by this pattern of opportunistic careerism, that is white supremacy. That I just wanted to close that loop.
No, that's a good point. We were talking about white feminism on an episode, and I felt like I had to clarify that, because I know a lot of people with the mindset that we call white feminism who are not white.
Right.
It's a class perspective.
Right. It's more a class statement. One of our commenters even said, "What do you mean white feminism? Isn't it more rich feminism?" And the answer is, yeah, basically, that's exactly what we mean. Right. Yeah. Exactly. But Shahid, when you were talking about the Democrats' chances in the midterms, you said something to the effect that, I hope it might, I hope low black turnout might come back to bite them. It sounds to me like what you're saying, like I said, as someone who's going to be watching this November from the sidelines, that this has to crash and burn in order to force a reevaluation. There has to be a reevaluation. Absent COVID, I don't think Joe Biden had a chance in hell of winning his race. Right. So that would have been a landslide. I mean, he won by 48,000 votes spread across 3 states, even as an apocalyptic event was happening and the president was getting the disease and pretending he can breathe on the balcony. I mean, it's just like, you've given all of that. The guy barely by a nose hair won. Does a defeat force some reevaluation? And it's hard for us to believe that it couldn't, but at the same time, it's hard for us to believe it could, given the MO and the incentive structure within the Democratic Party and all of the concentric circles around the around the party, like you talk about, the non-for-profits and the PR firms and things like that. But at the rank and file level, at what point do people, especially after the shellacking that looks like is going to be handed down to them in a couple weeks, not reevaluate? I know it's baseball playoff season, so Russell's getting very sick of my baseball comparisons, but the Yankees just got swept by the Astros, and all over sports radio today, they're finally saying we need to rebuild this team from the ground up. We need to fire the general manager, clean house, and start anew, because it's not just that this team doesn't win in the postseason, it's that the team is not built to win the big game. You can't win in the postseason when you average 15 strikeouts a game, when you have a piecemeal bullpen structure. And that's the Democratic Party. This is not a team that's built to win. even setting aside Schumer, Pelosi, right? I mean, of course, it's absurd that they're where they are, but look at their rising stars. Look at Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams, a person whose reputation has been completely manufactured by the media. What has she done? She lost in 2018. She's going to lose this year by more than she lost in 2018. What has this person done to become the future of the Democratic Party? Nothing. Nothing. She has nothing to actually run on, nothing to actually justify her star power. Mayor Pete, they recruit a small town mayor from a town no one ever heard of. All of a sudden, he's one of the front runners for the nomination next time. Why? Why?
He speaks fucking Norwegian, goddammit.
I mean, these are just media creations. This is not a team that's built to win. And I feel like at some point, the dam has to break. At some point, people have to understand that. I can't predict it now because, honestly, I am done trying to, let's see, I'm having a George W. Bush moment here. Overestimate or underestimate? I'm done misunderestimating the intelligence of Democratic voters.
Yes.
All right? I don't know where the hell they're at. But
well,
what do you think? Sorry, that was a long-winded question. I got off on a rant there.
No apology necessary. I think you hit the nail on the head at the end right there, which is the question is how much do voters care? Do they have a memory? And history would suggest that Americans don't care, that there isn't, we have the memory of a gnat or a goldfish maybe, and, the sort of like intellectual capacity of a starfish. We live in an ignorant country and people settle for tribalism, right? It's why so many people vote Democratic because they're better than the GOP, right? Woohoo! And, when you talk about the team not being built to win, what you're talking about, and, before I dig in on Stacey Abrams, I'd much rather turn the lens at people like Pete, Beto. There are white men who have records in office. Pete's in particular, if you look at his housing record as a mayor in South Bend.
Yeah. I forgot about Beto. That's how overrated he is. You're absolutely right about Beto, but he's so overrated, didn't even cross my mind. I'm sorry.
Well, and the reason I'm singling out Pete, Pete has this problem historically with Black constituents.
Oh yeah,
serving their needs, and yet
if you're Black and you shake your hand with Pete, you've endorsed him.
Well, but in San Francisco, what I'm trying to make the point here is, as a city that is very much an LGBT power center, San Francisco lines up behind Pete, right? Pete's exactly what a city like San Francisco wants. Racist history be damned. It's the triumph of tokenism.
Right.
And I, at the end of the day, I would like to say the Democratic voters are going to figure it out one day, but it seems to me it doesn't matter how many times they lose, as long as they've got somebody on the stage who looks like them that they can, feel that they're supposedly represented by. Policy be damned. Americans are too ignorant to defend their interests at the end of the day. And I would be sharper than that. Journalists are too ignorant to defend their interests. And I won't even just point at the suppression of whistleblowers and evidence when I was being smeared. Look at the way that Julian Assange is just not being covered at all. There is a long-running bipartisan prosecution in this country that would effectively end freedom of the press as we know it. It would make it right now, both and the Biden and the Obama administrations were all committed to this principle that exposing government crimes should be a crime, which of course is ludicrous in a country with a First Amendment. I mean, if the First Amendment means anything, it's that you should be able to report on government crimes, which is now being, prosecuted as espionage. And the press won't even show up for work to cover this, legendary historic threat to its own damn institutional interests. And when you have editors of publications who are too co-opted to demonstrate even the most meager independence, I'm not even talking about defending the public interest. I'm talking about defending their own damn independence, but they're so co-opted they could not care less. This gets back to the careerism piece, right? Because institutions are ultimately steered by individuals, and individuals have interests that often diverge from their institutions. And I have witnessed a country run into the ditch by that pattern repeated over and over again. Kirsten Sinema, right? You've got a member of the Senate with an individual incentive to retire at some Washington law firm, and they're going to line up, down the block to throw $5 million a year paychecks at her. And so why would she give a damn about what her constituents think or need, right? She's only there to cash in, apparently. And this goes back to your, sort of question from maybe a half hour ago. She was one of us. Nancy Pelosi was supposedly one of us, right? In the late 80s, she was championing universal health. Now suddenly she's not a big fan of Medicare for all. At the time we're living through a pandemic and scales of medical debt sweeping the country that are unprecedented in the history of human civilization right now. The amount of debt that is sweeping across the United States is staggering. No one's even paying attention to it. No one's even talking about Medicare for all. It's not even on the table anymore. And it's just like I'm witnessing the regression of a system. I often think about the 60s as a high watermark in some respects in terms of organizing, contrary especially to the military industrial establishment. And I think that we have lived through what I hope will not prove to be a high watermark of the movement to establish human rights domestically, particularly in the context of a free and universal healthcare.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so astounding. It's funny that I get to say this to you now, but when Pelosi said, as a way to sort of, cozy up to the sort of, progressives in the party, hey, for every cause you advocate for, I have a sign in my basement advocating for that cause. It's like, yeah, that's exactly
That's
why
the problem.
people can't
It's in the
stand you.
basement.
Right, exactly. Like, that's exactly why people can't stand you, because they know that you have it in you somewhere to know what the right thing to do is, but you put those signs in the basement, and now you come up here and make excuses for that. All right, I guess we'll wrap. But Russell, I know you.
Since we're talking about Pelosi, yeah, this is kind of my beat.
Okay.
This particular aspect of Nancy Pelosi's corruption.
Okay.
All right, Keaton, do we have that element? Now,
Yes, we do.
Nancy Pelosi's stock performance is better than all of the greatest investors in the world. She outperforms everybody. Bill Ackman, Walter Schloss, Warren Buffett, George Soros, Peter Lynch, the Medallion Fund. She does better than all of them. So either you believe that Nancy Pelosi is some kind of Rain Man stock picking genius, or she is inside trading. It could not be more obvious, because this is not one fluke year. This is every year. This is why the kind of Wall Street bets kind of traders have a stock service you can pay for that tracks Nancy Pelosi's stock picks. And whatever she picks, people pile into those stocks because it's almost a guarantee. It's an open thing. You can't even call it an open secret. It could not be more obvious. Her stock performance is literally mathematically impossible. Shouldn't she be brought to justice? Should she not be in prison? Because I know if I were doing that, I'd be in jail. They'd say there's no way this schmuck in Harlem is outperforming everything. Let's investigate this. There's no way this guy is performing like this year after year after year.
So 3 answers to that. One is, I'm going to try to do the highlights and then dig into them. So one is our insider trading Congress of Millionaires exempts itself from the law categorically. I'll come back to that. Second answer to that is the accountability for someone like that inheres through the electoral process. And then I want to come back finally to the emoluments clause. I'm definitely going to lose my place somewhere here. So if anybody feels like reminding me of that in about 10 minutes, I might need it. So we'll finish with the emoluments clause, which is the right answer here. And so the very long story short is yes, she absolutely should. And the emoluments clause is the pathway. The reason it won't happen is the same reason that Trump is free, because nobody in Congress has the cojones to actually hold anybody accountable for violations of the emoluments clause. The Constitution has a textual prohibition on public officials enriching themselves to public offense. It's like the most baseline commitment that you would expect any legitimate government to have as an anti-corruption norm that Washington flouts openly in many different ways. Insider trading is just one example. The revolving door between Washington and Wall Street is another. I was just talking about Kirsten Sinema and what her parachute's going to look like. The corporate co-optation of our democracy is part of the problem here, and that's trading is one way that it reveals itself. Let's go back to where we started now. The reason it's not actually criminal is because Congress decides what the law is. And when Congress decided what insider trading means, they were only talking to people who work inside companies. The people who work inside Congress, who shift the economy through policymaking, are categorically exempt from insider trading laws, which is to say, I want to make this really clear for your audience.
Are they categorically exempt?
Well, if they have a director control of some company, they're subjected to insider trading laws in that context. But yeah, if you're in Congress, if you're a staffer in Congress, if you're a spouse of a member of Congress, you can pretty much do what you want. There are disclosure requirements for members, and I believe maybe some committee staff, but there aren't limits. It's not like you're blocked from trading in companies that are implicated by the policy-making decisions before you. And particularly, this idea that trades can have their own influence because Pelosi is an oligarch and people are watching her performance, that she's literally driving the market. Like, this is like a whole, extent to which when people say capitalism, they often think about an economic system where people can invest in things, grow resources. Capitalism, as we have it in the United States in 2022, is the rule by oligarchs with capital to serve capital over the needs of people. Capitalism, as we have built it in the United States, is a commitment to capital before people. It has nothing to do with any of the things that Adam Smith talked about. It is, it's why we're able to openly violate human rights in any of a dozen different ways and nobody cares, right? Because it serves capital. It puts money in people's pockets. If you co-opt enough people, that's sort of the lesson of the brand of fascism that we are introducing into the world, is that if you put a dollar sign behind it, any number of people will race towards an authoritarian outcome, and they'll welcome it, even if it marginalizes themselves, even if it demonizes their own communities, right? I mean, that's like the story of the Harvey Milk Club here, for instance. Or I should go back to the second of those answers. Now I lost it. One of them was the first is that our insider trading millionaires exempt themselves from the law. We ended with the emoluments clause. There was a piece in between. Oh, accountability. You asked if she belongs in jail. And, certainly under the current law, she does not. Except, well, at least under the current statutory regime, she does not. But the Constitution.
So she is allowed legally to trade on inside information.
Oh, yeah. And has
I was not even aware of that.
None of this should.
That's why we should have more lawyers on, Keaton.
Look, I just want to be clear. None of this is new. This has always been true. As long as you've been alive, members of Congress have been filling their pockets. That's why we have a climate catastrophe. It's why we have wars for profit. It's why we are in this damn mess in the first place. And it shouldn't surprise anybody. I've been saying this for years, right? And there is finally now this year started a policymaking process. A series of bills were introduced into Congress that would attempt to restrain this, but all of them are inadequate. Most of them would fail to apply to staff members and their spouses. All of them would exempt entirely investments not in publicly traded stocks, but in private equity instruments and hedge funds. And here's, this is a really important point to grip. Stocks are not the problem. Corruption is the problem. The more people talk about stocks and trading, the more, it's easy to get fooled by the bait and switch, because that's what they're writing bills to restrict stock trading. But stock trading isn't the problem. Divided loyalties and conflicts of interest are the problem. And so when you have members of Congress who invest in things that are poised to make money or not, whether they're publicly listed stocks or not, that's the problem. And so we need to be banning investments in equity instruments and private equity instruments by members of Congress, because even if we block publicly traded stock, even if that got prohibited for members and their spouses and staffs and their spouses, and I would bet you any amount of money that's not going to make it through Congress, especially with Pelosi at the top.
No.
Even if that passed, it's still got, a loophole big enough to drive a truck through. So, even these theatrical performative responses to the long overdue controversy don't do anything to actually guard the public interest. And so you're right, you should be outraged. The law openly permits unapologetic corruption. The reason I wanted to close with that whole bit about the emoluments clause is that the emoluments clause, as part of the Constitution, is the law of the land, except that what it enables is not to put someone in prison, but rather to remove them from office. And I tried to do that through the open frontal process, an electoral process. But, one way to neatly summarize my experience in politics, or San Francisco's, as it relates to our congressional seat over the last 6 years, is that an insider trading millionaire oligarch was let off the hook for her repeated violations of human rights and support for human rights violations, not just in and across the United States, but around the entire world, through this pattern of racist character assassination that we were talking about. And again, it's not the character assassination that worries me, it's the corruption. And it's the corruption that it insulates. And the use of race to enable capital and its corruption is the sort of thing that Americans seem disinclined to observe, even the ones who claim to care about race. And, I just, I don't know what else to do at this point. I've done what I can. At this point, I'm just an artist raising my voice, after having tried to offer some people a better choice, and as eager to everybody else to see what the future holds. But I do want to shout out, if I may, a couple of voices that are still running.
Sure.
You talked about the midterms coming up, and I think it was Keaton who'd asked, do we have to let the ship sink in order for to build a new one? And that might in fact prove to be the case. I'm very eager just to see progressives break through where we can, and there are a couple other races in California where progressive challengers have won the jungle primary and are facing centrist incumbents. The two I'm most excited about are Angelica Duenas and David Kim in Los Angeles. Both of them are coming back from runs in 2020 when they came quite close. I'm not sure what surprises the establishment has in store for either of them, but they're in the mix. Maybe a girl is running in a one of those congressional seats, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm blanking on who else. There are at least a few other allies. I should have checked those notes in particular before joining you.
That's all right. Just send me an email. We'll put it in the show notes.
Will do. Yeah, I would be happy to do that. I also want to just note in particular, while we're looking into midterms, the 24 presidential election obviously looms beyond it. And I'm very eager to see a Democrat emerge to primary Biden. It has to happen. And, all of the folks who rallied behind, whether it was Bernie, whether it was Liz, whether it was, frankly, there are any number of voices, and I'll throw out like the Andrew Yangs and the Michael Bloombergs, whoever you supported in 2020, if you are interested in blocking the unapologetic fascism of the GOP, Biden cannot be the standard bearer in 2024 and beyond. It's got to be somebody with support with greater support from across the country. And that figure doesn't seem to be in Washington yet, because the vice president doesn't have it. Mayor Pete doesn't have it. There's going to be a need for an outsider in 2024 to come in. And I have a few thoughts on who that might be. I hope that some of them run.
Well, Matt, okay, since you went there, I have to ask you. We've talked a lot about this on the show. We've spilled a lot of ink about this. Part of the problem with the Democratic Party is that the voters of the party are trash. They're trash. Look at what all of these volunteers did to elevate Bernie in 2020 out there in the snow in New Hampshire. All it took was for Barack Obama to give the thumbs down night before Super Tuesday. That was it. Yeah. That was it. All of the effort just pissed away. Between those two campaigns, how can we tell people, no, it'll be different this time? Because the message that I took is they're never going to allow it. Well, this remember, is their party. It's not a democracy. This is their party. They are never going to let a progressive take the reins. Never. Because that'll be the end of the gravy train. All of these consultants get fired if any clean politician gets in that position.
Speak it. Yep. No, that's exactly right. And that's why I'm saying we need an outsider. Bernie wasn't an outsider. He's been a senator for 50 years, right? I mean, he was outside of the centrist establishment of the party, but at the end of the day, he's a Washington figure, right? And so I'm eager to see someone run who is not of the political class in Washington.
But wouldn't you have to run outside of the Democratic Party? Because they're not going to let you take the apparatus over. I would not put it past them to super delegate that.
Yeah, no, you're right. I'll be specific. I mean, the person who I hope primaries Biden in particular was Marianne Williamson, who is coming from outside of the party, ran as a Democrat. I have beef with some of her positions. I would hope that she might be more skeptical of the Pentagon as a president than she has been as a candidate. But by and large, her vision does center people over profit. She does come outside from the political class. She does have a vision of democracy that is rooted in some version of legitimate self-governance by a people instead of this institutional co-optation. And she faced her own particularly gender-based smears, right? She was dismissed as all these things not serious or crazy or kooky just because she actually was the one person who was willing to stand on the stage and say sane things that threaten the establishment. And we need people like that. And, she's the kind of figure with the kind of voice and the kind of audience who I think might be able to break through. And I'm, however disappointed I am in Democratic voters, in the press, in, the organs of our democracy systematically failing to enable this erosion of whatever vestige of it we have. I do hope that there are voices like hers in the future, voices like Angelica's, voices like David, again, that David Kim and Angelica Duenas in LA, and Marianne Williamson in 2024. Those are some voices that I'm still quite inspired by and do hope to have a chance to support at some point soon.
All right. Well, we certainly hope that you keep raising your voice as loud as you can, as an artist, as a writer, however you can get it out there, because it's very, very valuable. And it was a great talk. And thank you so much for joining us. It was great to meet you, Shahid.
Thanks for having me. If I could just shout out 2 invitations for people. I've got this Substack now, so I'm writing there. If anybody wants to, read going forward, you can find me at shahidbuttar.substack.com. And you mentioned as an artist, and the only thing I've been doing actually the last 6 months is DJing, and I've been working on an EP. I have some original music coming out soon, tracks including Ferguson to Jerusalem, NSA versus USA, and Legacy of Ashes, which is a 3-verse diss track for the CIA. And I'm looking forward to doing on the dance floor what I couldn't do in Congress. And I'm here to educate some folks.
All right. Well, we might come to you with
those guys are not known for getting their groove on, Shahid.
Oh, I would have been the funkiest member of Congress by far.
Yeah. I don't doubt that. We might be in the market for some new theme music, so maybe we'll make a deal with you. We got our theme music.
Let's hit up Shahid. Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. All righty, man. Well, thank you so much. It was great to meet you. I really appreciate you joining us.
You too. Keep up the great work. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Shahid. Thank you.
Bye. Shahid Buttar, everybody. It's funny, that interview was a little different from what I thought, because I always knew Shahid to be this sort of happy warrior. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And you can tell that's a guy who's been through it. You know what I mean? And so he was a little different from when when you're running for office. Not that it's fake; it wasn't fake when he was doing it, but you're running for office. You're surrounded by supporters. There's a positive vibe. It's let's go get them. And that interview had a different tone for obvious reasons. I mean, he was red pilling us for an hour there. I mean, that was real talk, as they say. And so I thought that came out really good.
Man. I mean, he had the vampires all over him for 6 years. He lost a lot of blood.
Yeah. Well, lost a lot of blood, but the heart could always pump more, right?
Yeah. No. It was very, very cool interview, very interesting. And this is why, look, I mean, I always say I'm like our resident Wall Street analyst. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. I didn't even know that they can legally do that. I always assumed they were just flouting the insider trading laws
and getting away with it.
I did not realize that. No, like they could just do that. Wow, that the level of corruption is just incredible. Yes, well, for us, insider trading laws don't matter. All the eyes, amazing.
All right, guys. Well, you could support the show at patreon.com/do-dissidents. The more members we get signed up, the more interviews like that we can do. We are going to be live tomorrow night, right? Tomorrow night, huge debate. John Fetterman versus Dr. Oz. This could...
We're going to get basically going to Mystery Science Theater it.
Well, we're not going to stream. We're going to come on right after it's over. So we'll have an exact time for you.
We're not going
to
stream it? I thought we were going to stream it.
No, because Fox, the last time, the site that I used to stream it, they took the video that, like, they might just kill the stream if we do that.
Really?
Yeah. It doesn't happen often, but it seemed like because they put in some claim just from the clips that we used. So the hell with that. Let's just come on right after. So what we'll do is we'll post a link to the debate, and then as soon as it's over, we'll come on. We'll have an exact time for you tomorrow. But that could prove to be a very, very consequential debate, because that race is getting very close now. Fetterman's lead is down to within 2 points on average. So that's now a dead heat.
Mm-hmm.
And if Oz beats Fetterman, that makes it much, much easier for the Republicans to win the House. Because then if everything else works out the way it's expected and they flip Nevada, boom, they win the Senate. Pardon me, I said the House. I should have said the Senate. Fetterman is a guy whose debate performance is going to be under scrutiny, because not just his health, but his mental faculties, his ability to recover from his stroke is becoming a campaign issue. So there's a lot of pressure on him tomorrow. That could be a very consequential debate.
Yeah, I'm going to make a prediction right now. Somebody who cannot process auditory information fairly or unfairly is not going to come off well in a debate.
Well, that's
And
what I mean. There's going to be.
they're going to prepare and prepare and prepare Dr. Crudite over there, and he's going to get the better of it.
Well, we will see what happens
in terms of the TV of it.
Right, to the TV. Oh, absolutely. But the thing is, so in so many debates, like, okay, the debates, debates don't tend to matter as much as like politics junkies like to think they do in most races. In this case, since Fetterman's ability to stand up and do the job of listening and talking and reciting words and communicating ideas, his ability to do that is now a major issue in that campaign. And so that's why tomorrow's debate could be hugely significant, not just for the Pennsylvania race, but for the balance of power moving forward. The whole Senate could ride on tomorrow. And so we will be here to give our immediate thoughts. Right after that, I'll put up a time tomorrow morning, and that'll be pumped out so everybody gets the idea when we're going to be on. All right, everybody. So
we've got a request there. We'll have to talk to our booker.
Green candidate for U.S. Senate, Richard Weiss. Oh, that's my uncle. Yeah, I'll get him. I'll grab him. Yes. I'll text him right now. Hey, Rich. Hey, Dick Weiss. That's what we call him in the family, Dick Weiss.
Hey,
come on tomorrow.
You schmuck. You haven't even reached out to be on the show.
All right, guys. Well, like I said, patreon.com/do dissidents. Please like this stream and subscribe to this channel. Thank you guys all for watching and commenting. Thank you very much to Shahid Buttar.
Listen, in case our regular viewers, because I really screwed up on the show yesterday. I said people were overwhelmingly against the Don't Say Gay bill. They're overwhelmingly for it in all of the polling.
Yeah, he flipped that.
Yeah, I flipped it by accident, and Keaton was checking Yankee scores. He didn't.
He
didn't bail me out.
I thought you said that, but I confused it for the same reason you confused it, because they're opposed to the policies that Don't Say Gay is opposed to. So it's a little bit in your head. It's a little difficult to keep track. Well, I wasn't checking Yankee scores. I already checked out. I'm done with the Yankees. I got you. You have my full attention now.
All right. That's what his wife said.
All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. Thanks very much for Shahid Buttar for coming on. Please like and subscribe. Patreon.com. Hit us up. We'll see you guys tomorrow night after the debate. Thanks very much.
Please clap.